All right, so this video is going to focus on 2.1. And the first thing I want to talk about in terms of 2.1 and multiplication is when I was younger, I'm not sure if you learned this, but I learned that 3 times 2 was exactly the same thing as 2 times 3. Right? That's what I learned. Like they both equaled 6. And I guess I want to tell you that's not true. They do both equal 6, but they don't mean the same thing. It's like how you model them. So for instance, the very first number is called the number of groups. So I'm going to put that number of groups, and I would recommend writing this down. So number of groups is the first number, and the second number is the group size. So if you look at this for a second, like if I say 3 times 2, well, this is modeled as 3 times 2 because there's 3 groups, and the group size each time is 2, right? And the question here says, how do you model 3 times negative 2? Well, that means that I have 3 groups of negative 2, right? So I start off here maybe, and I go backwards. 1, 2, so that's negative 2. And then I'm going back 2 more, and that's negative 2. And I go back 2 more, and that's negative 2. So the two things I want to show you, number one, whenever you see like things being multiplied together, the first number is the number of groups, and the second number is the group size. That's important when you draw things out. And the second thing is, whenever you model this, like group size, if it's negative 2, the arrow goes the opposite way, like it's getting smaller and smaller, right? So if I think about 3 times negative 2, I mean, really what that should be is I should have it at 0. That's where it starts. And it goes back negative 2, and that would be at negative 2. And then it goes back again, negative 2. And now I'm at negative 4, right? And then finally I do one more of these, because there's 3 of them. And that's at negative 6. So the answer to 3 times negative 2 equals negative 6. And we'll learn other strategies, but just so you understand how to draw this, that's what I'm looking for. So if we look at this, look at the pattern. 2 times 2, this is number of groups, group size, 4. 1 times 2 is 2. 0 times 2 is 0, because if I have 0 groups of 2, that's nothing. If I have negative 1 groups of 2, which is a weird way to think about it, but I'd have negative 2. Negative 2 groups of 2, I'd have negative 4. And negative 3 groups of 2, I would have negative 6. So we're kind of continuing this pattern. And if we look at this one, for instance, like this one says integers with the same sign. They're both positive, right? Well, the product here is 6, and that's a positive. This one here is integers with different sign, right? With diff sign. So I have a positive and a negative. In this case, my answer is going to be negative 6, and of course, it's a negative. This one here, I have different sign as well. But this is also negative 6. This one here, they're both negative. So a negative times a negative. Think about what we just did with that integer unit when we had this thing here. When I put the 2 negatives next to each other, you guys kept making them positives, which is what you do. Because a negative times a negative is a positive. So this is the same sign, so I'll say same. And this will be positive 6, and it's a positive answer. 6 times 3, same sign again. They're both positive. And this equals 6 as well. So what do you think these last 3 are? I want you to pause for a moment and think about what it might be. Hopefully you said that this is going to be different, first of all, right? And then we know that the answer is negative 10, and it's negative. This one here is different as well, because the group size, or number of groups, is negative, and the group size is positive, so this is negative 30. And this one here, they're both negative, so it's same sign. And a negative times a negative is a positive, right? So I get 15, and that's a positive. If I look at these here, I want to do just a couple of them. So hopefully when you look through, you can do these really fast if this starts clicking. So this is a 6, this is negative 6, this is positive 2, because it's a negative times a negative. This is a negative times a positive, so it's negative 4. Negative times a positive, negative 8. Positive times positive, positive 3. Negative times negative, positive 6. Positive times negative, negative 3. So try doing this last row. What would these equal? All right, hopefully you figured out that this was a positive times a negative. So this is negative 8. This is positive 4, positive 6, and positive 8. These are because they're negative times negatives, right? To add on to that, I want to show you this thing here. So if I have something to the second power, like in this case, negative 2 to the second power, that means everything inside of this parentheses is multiplied 2 times. So it's like negative 2 times negative 2. Well, that's a negative times a negative, which is a positive answer. That's how I got 4. But look at how it looks different with the parentheses not around it. If this is the case, it's whatever this exponent is touching. So I have my negative sign, and then in parentheses, 2 times 2, because the 2 is only touching this if there's no parentheses around it. And this answer is negative 4. So although they look really similar, these parentheses make a big difference. So let's look at this one here. If I have negative 5 to the second power, I want you to think about what that means. And how is it different than negative quantity 5 to the second, right? There's a difference here between them if you look at it. Hopefully when you see this, both things are inside of the parentheses, so it's negative 5 times negative 5, and a negative times a negative is a positive, so I have 25. And this one, I have my negative sign, but then it's just 5 times 5, because that's all it's in parentheses, and that equals 25. But there's a negative sign before it, so it's negative 25. So one is positive and one is negative. And then if it says like, figure out what this is, well, if you look here, although there's 3 numbers, I have a negative times a positive, which is negative 34. And then I have negative 34 times negative 5. And now I have a negative times a negative, and that's why it becomes a positive answer at the end, and it's 170. So when you look at these things, you really got to kind of play it all the way out and figure out what this is equal to. This one here, I do whatever's in parentheses first, so it's negative 3 plus 4, which is 1. And then negative 6 times 1, which is negative 6, and then plus 6, which is negative 6 plus 6, which is 0. And here's the final thing I want to leave you with. I want you to think about if you have a negative integer times a positive integer, what kind of answer will you have? Will it be a positive or a negative? If you have 2 negative integers and you multiply them, will it be a positive or negative answer? And finally, if you have 2 positive integers and you multiply them together, will it be positive or negative? Hopefully this made sense. Make sure you ask questions if you have any.